The first time my son called me a legal liability, he did it in front of the HOA board and the UPS guy delivering someone's dog food. I had come down to the lobby to tape a flyer for our Makerspace Summer Scholarship, Grandparents Teach Coding, when Daniel took the paper from my hand like I was a child with scissors. "Mom, you can't keep posting things without clearing them. If a kid trips on one of your classes, we're exposed." The board members shifted in their chairs. The UPS guy pretended to examine his scanner. My cheeks burned, not from shame but from the newness of hearing my son talk about me like a problem to be contained. I was a 70-year-old widow, a retired librarian who could run a meeting in my sleep, and I'd co-founded Lakeview Makers 3 years earlier with my late husband, Javier. But Daniel had married a woman who loved words like exposed and liability, and lately he echoed her like a radio tower. I told him calmly the flyer had been approved last year and that the program was insured. He folded it twice and slid it into his blazer pocket. "Times change, Mom. Kelsey and I are cleaning up the governance." His tone was managerial, the way he talked to waiters. He added, loudly enough for the room, "We booked a notary for Friday. You'll sign the durable power of attorney and the board resolution transferring executive authority. That way you can finally rest." Rest. As if the work I did, grant writing at midnight, sourcing donated laptops, walking nervous 12-year-olds through their first solder joint, were something I should be relieved to abandon. It wasn't just housework I brought to this family. I brought a lifetime of reading bylaws and spotting small print that didn't match. The UPS guy flicked me a look, small, apologetic. Mr. Moran from 3C cleared his throat. That's when our concierge, Lila, who rarely spoke above a murmur, stepped closer and slipped a folded receipt into my palm as she handed me the package I hadn't ordered. "Dropped off for you, Ms. Alvarez." She held my gaze 1 second longer than usual. On the receipt I saw Lakeview Makers' debit card number with 4 transfers to KREM Consulting for strategic alignment, each for $2,950. Just under the $3,000 threshold, requiring 2 signatures under our internal controls. KREM. Kelsey Ray Morgan. My daughter-in-law had paid herself from the nonprofit. I looked up at Daniel, smiling like he'd solved me. "Friday's fine," I said. "Send me the draft." He seemed satisfied. He didn't notice my hands had stopped trembling. He didn't notice Lila's almost imperceptible nod. He didn't notice that a paper slipped quietly into an old woman's hand can be an earthquake. On Friday, I would not be resting. I would be ready. And in the meantime, I knew whose name hid inside those initials. The letter was written in the kind voice banks use when they're about to lock you out. It referenced recent concerns raised by a family member regarding your cognitive capacity and invited my guardian to schedule a supportive banking plan that would consolidate my accounts under shared control. I had no guardian. I had a son with a fast mouth and a daughter-in-law who'd learned which adjectives turn a person into a problem. I spent Thursday morning at Lakeview Makers, pretending to label bins while I listened. Volunteers talked as they sorted. A middle school teacher whose class we supplied with refurbished Raspberry Pis, a retired machinist who liked to set up the drill press just so. "Kelsey's really turning us professional," someone said. "Vendors get paid in hours now." Another voice added, "Her cousin Blake fixed the QuickBooks mess. He's a CPA." I made a note, "Cousin Blake, QuickBooks." By noon, a rumor had landed in the grocery store line where old women like me become invisible and, paradoxically, hear everything. "You know Nora's stepping down," the woman behind me whispered to her friend as she examined a melon. "I heard her son's taking over before the gala. Liability issues." She said liability like contagious. I kept my eyes on the canned tomatoes and swallowed the dry taste of being discussed. The cashier, a college kid who sometimes came to our 3D printing nights, slipped me a free canvas bag and said, "Your laser cutter saved my architecture project, Ms. A. Don't let them take your keys." His ears turned red after he said it. I patted his hand. "Keys are tricky things," I said. "Some open doors. Some lock them." At home, I called the bank. After too many menus, I reached a woman named Priya who announced, carefully, that a temporary protective alert had been placed at the request of my son, citing concerns about unsafe spending and confusion. I asked what evidence they'd received. She paused. A notarized statement from a family member, plus a note from a physician's assistant regarding forgetfulness. My hands went cold. I saw it clearly. The PA note from Kelsey's friend at her med spa, the one who handed out Botox disclaimers like birthday napkins. As for notarization, Friday hadn't even happened yet. Priya, I said, keeping my tone mild, as if asking for a book on interlibrary loan. Would this alert get reviewed if I walked into a branch and asked to speak with the fraud officer? She exhaled, which told me she was human in a system. It would trigger an internal check, yes. But, Ms. Alvarez, are you safe? I almost laughed. Safe is a complicated word. By late afternoon, Daniel arrived with a folder and Kelsey trailed behind him with a smile that reached only her teeth. Mom, the notary's coming here tomorrow, he said, laying the power of attorney on my table next to the bowl of oranges Javier used to refill with religious devotion. Kelsey added, we're also consolidating the nonprofit's governance so it's easier on you. The resolution will make me interim executive director pro bono. She said pro bono like sainthood. I flipped pages slowly, as if the words were heavy. The POA was broad and durable, effective immediately. The resolution granted Kelsey authority to execute contracts, engage consultants, and disperse funds up to $25,000 in furtherance of strategic goals. My eyes returned to engage consultants. KREM would be thrilled. I looked up and let my voice wobble the smallest bit. Daniel, I'm tired. Maybe it's time. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, followed by relief so naked it hurt. You won't regret it, Mom. We'll take care of everything. That night, I ironed a blouse for the notary I did not intend to impress. I set out my Medicare card, my passport, my marriage certificate, my board binder. And I wrote a short note in my planner, agree, then trigger review. My fear of being a burden had been dragging me by the collar for months. If I leaned into that fear for one day, it would open a door Daniel and Kelsey didn't know existed. I arrived at the branch in my church jacket, the one with roomy pockets. Priya wasn't there, but a young man from Financial Crimes led me into a small glass room with a bowl of mints that tasted like aquarium water. He pulled up a screen and pointed to the $2,950 transfers I'd seen on the receipt. Ms. Alvarez, do you recognize these? I looked at my hands, then at him. Sometimes I forget little things, I said. Names move around. But I do recall our bylaws. 2 signatures for anything over $3,000. He frowned. These are just under. Imagine that, I replied softly. He excused himself, returned with a supervisor, and they asked if I would like to consider revoking any recently granted powers. I let my voice catch. It's all so confusing. Maybe you could print me a list of authorized signers? They did. The paper showed me what I needed. Temporary POA on file, Daniel Alvarez. And under Lakeview Makers, authorized, Nora M. Alvarez. Chair, Kelsey R. Morgan, interim ED, Blake Morgan, CFO. Cousin Blake had installed himself as our CFO. I left the bank and walked 2 blocks to a notary I trusted. The UPS guy, whose name turned out to be Dante, had a commission on the side. Ms. A, he said, lowering his voice. The condo lobby was tense last week. You okay? I nodded, laid out the bank printout, and asked him to notarize 2 letters, one revoking Daniel's POA effective immediately, and one calling an emergency board meeting under Article 4, Section 3 of our bylaws to address material concerns regarding conflicts of interest and unauthorized disbursements. Dante read every word before stamping. Some days the job's just shipping labels, he said. Some days it's history. That afternoon, I visited our attorney, a diligent woman named Mariah who had once taught a free clinic at our space about forming LLCs. You're sure you want to do this publicly? She asked, flipping through my binder. The gala's tomorrow. That's exactly why, I said. Our donors are our mirror. If the house is crooked, I want them to see me straighten it. We spent 2 hours preparing. She filed an injunction request to freeze the nonprofit's accounts except for payroll and rent. She drafted a board resolution suspending Blake pending a review and a conflict of interest policy reminder with a simple sentence that made my heart beat steadier. No officer may receive compensation from consulting contracts funded by the organization. She also asked a question I'd been dodging. Do you want to press charges against family? I watched a couple holding hands outside her window. I want to press the truth, I said. The law will decide the rest. At dusk, as I finished printing seat cards for the gala, the door to the makerspace opened and a girl of 15 slid inside like a guilty thought. Ms. Alvarez? It was Anna, our quiet scholarship kid who avoided eye contact and built robots like she was praying. She held up a key fob. I found this last week under the back desk. It opens the office door when the alarm set. Someone's been coming at night. She handed me a USB drive wrapped in painter's tape. My uncle is the janitor. He told me they made him clean late. So he saved the security footage. You should see the timestamps. My ribs felt too small for my lungs. In the blurry still images, I could already imagine Kelsey's white sneakers, the shape of Blake's cap. They had chosen the hour after I left each night, when an old woman walking home with a tote bag looks unthreatening. I squeezed Anna's hand. You risked something bringing me this. I risked nothing, she said fiercely, chin up for once. You taught me to solder. The hotel ballroom smelled like votive candles and money. The screen behind the stage looped photos of kids holding cardboard prototypes, while saxophone jazz kept people feeling generous. I watched donors greet Kelsey as if she were the woman who built the place and watched her receive it like she believed she had. Daniel hovered near the bar in a suit that cost 2 months of my pension. Blake wore a tie too shiny for someone who handled budgets. When the MC tapped the mic, Kelsey stepped to the podium with a practiced breath. As interim executive director, I'm honored. She launched into a speech about scaling impact and aligning strategy, every word sculpted like foam. My speech had been cut. The program slide said Founders Tribute, and then, in smaller text video, they had turned me into a montage. I walked to the side aisle and signaled to Mariah, who sat with a folder on her lap, expression neutral. Lila, our concierge, had dressed in her Sunday dress and taken a seat near the back. Dante stood by the exit with a messenger bag. The janitor uncle leaned against a wall like a man who knew where every spill began. Kelsey thanked the donors and introduced a special gift from our finance team, and I realized she was about to announce a new consulting partnership. Before the applause could gather, I stepped forward and took the second microphone from the stand. My hands were steady. Quiet strength has a temperature. Mine ran cold and clear. Friends, I said, and the word had weight. I'm Nora Alvarez. Some of you know me from solder burns and scraped knuckles. Others know me for the emails I send at 2 a.m., begging for one more Chromebook. I'm told I should skip my remarks for my comfort. But comfort's a poor substitute for truth. A murmur, then silence. I held up 2 pieces of paper. This is our bylaw on conflict of interest. And this is a receipt showing 4 transfers to KREM Consulting, each just under the approval threshold, for work described as strategic alignment. I turned to Kelsey without anger, the way you turn to a student who's smart enough to stop now. Kelsey Ray Morgan, would you like to explain what KREM stands for? She smiled the way a person smiles when their zipper breaks and they hope no one notices. Our external consultants firm, she said smoothly. Obviously vetted. I nodded. Excellent. Then you'll also appreciate our donors' right to see who benefits. I gestured to Dante, who connected the laptop to the projector with the confident click of a man shipping a package marked fragile. The screen filled with a grainy video of our office door at 11:47 p.m., the date stamp matching one of the transfers. Kelsey's white sneakers stepped into view. Blake followed, cap low, carrying a cardboard box. They entered the office. The timestamp jumped. The door opened again. Daniel, my son, slipped in, looked up at the camera, and then, God help me, unplugged it. But the janitor had installed a second one facing the hallway. The room made a sound I'll never forget, the collective intake of breath when a story people have politely ignored refuses to remain polite. Beside me, Mariah rose and handed a sheaf of papers to our board chair, a mild man who teaches algebra and had not expected to become visible tonight. We are issuing an emergency suspension of the interim executive director and the CFO pending investigation, she announced, voice thin but firm. We are freezing discretionary disbursements, and we will appoint an interim treasurer from outside the family. Kelsey's face hardened, and she turned to Daniel with a small, vicious whisper that the front table could hear. Handle your mother. Daniel stepped toward me, jaw tight, and for a sick second I saw the child who used to bring me broken toys to fix. Mom, you don't understand how business works. You're humiliating yourself. I addressed the donors, not my son. If anyone here believes this is about an old woman who can't keep up, please come on Tuesday mornings and watch me teach a 10-year-old to read a schematic. If anyone here wonders whether aging is a liability, please know I kept every receipt. We are not a family slush fund. We are a public trust. From the back, a voice I didn't expect cut through the quiet. That's true. It was Mr. Moran from 3C, our building's crank who hates noisy devices and yet donated $2,000 when he saw a girl build a prosthetic hand. I saw those late-night lights. Thought it was good work. Turns out it was something else. Shame. And in that sudden shift, the neighbor who usually complains becoming the witness who weighs truth, the room tilted. A teacher raised her hand and said, Ms. Alvarez never once billed us for overtime. Another donor added, my company matched gifts because of her grant proposals. Not Kelsey's decks. Kelsey tried to reclaim the microphone, but Mariah moved quicker. For the record, she said, holding up the letter I'd brought, Ms. Alvarez revoked the power of attorney this afternoon. The bank has flagged suspicious activity. The police are not our first resort, but they're a tool we will use if needed. Daniel's face crumpled into something I couldn't look at without wanting to hold him. Kelsey recovered faster. This is a smear, she said. My cousin is a licensed CPA. Blake's shiny tie looked dull under the projector glare. He lifted his chin. All reimbursements were approved by the interim ED. That would be you, Kelsey. The board chair, pale but upright, banged a spoon against a water glass like a judge with a toy gavel. We stand adjourned for tonight. Donors, we appreciate your patience. Classes will continue Monday. I turned to step off the stage, and there, just by the steps, stood Anna. She didn't speak. She just gave a small nod like a soldier returning a salute. The unknown number belonged to the building's closing attorney, a meticulous woman who had handled dozens of units and remembered everything. We met Monday morning in her conference room where the coffee was strong and the carpet made your footsteps float. She slid a copy of my deed across the table and tapped a paragraph I'd never had reason to reread. 2 years earlier, after Javier died, the condo had been retitled from joint tenancy to my sole name. But there was a line added later, squeezed into a legal description like a careless footnote, transfer on death to Daniel Alvarez. I stared at it as if it could apologize. It came in with a stack of association documents, the attorney said. Looked routine. The notarial seal is real, but the grantor's request signature doesn't match yours. We compared my old signatures to the deeds. The G in Nora had been looped strangely, like Kelsey's loops. My breath felt shallow but clean. I was not crazy. I had been targeted. The police had already taken statements, cautious and courteous. They spoke to the board, to Blake, to Kelsey, to Daniel. They asked me if I wanted to press charges for forgery and misappropriation. I told them to follow the evidence. I told them to leave my grandson out of it and to let the janitor be anonymous if possible. They nodded. Sometimes institutions can be gentle. The nonprofit survived because community is stubborn. A retired accountant named Mrs. Patel stepped in as interim treasurer and, with a small, satisfied smile, found a network of microtransactions that Blake had coded as hardware calibration. They totaled $28,400 in 4 months, spread across 5 dummy vendors. The bank returned most of it after the fraud review, and Kelsey discovered that consulting without an actual contract is a poor plan when your name sits inside the acronym. Daniel moved out of their rental and into a spare room at a friend's. When he came to see me, he stood at my door with his shoulders bent like a tall boy who had outgrown his apologies. "Mom," he said, voice hoarse. "I told myself we were protecting you. I should have protected your work." I looked at his hands, the same hands that used to bring me gears to clean, fingers black with bicycle grease. "Sit," I said. "Listen." And I explained guardianship and how easily people use the word burden like a key to other people's houses. He cried once, a single sharp sound like a chain breaking. He asked what he could do now. I told him to volunteer on Thursday nights, not to speak, just to learn. The board removed Kelsey and Blake. The district attorney charged Blake with embezzlement and Kelsey with attempted fraud regarding the deed alteration. Their attorneys used words like misunderstanding, but the footage had its own grammar. The charges will take months. Justice in our town moves like a careful grandmother, checking every crosswalk. Meanwhile, our class is filled. People gave more, not less, because they saw what they were sustaining. On the first Tuesday after the gala, I unlocked the makerspace early and set out safety glasses. Lila appeared with a Tupperware of empanadas. "For strength," she said, then added with quiet pride, "I told the bank teller to look again." She was the reason the first alert had been flagged, the real ally in the quiet place where scripts would have told her not to see. During soldering, Anna's robot blinked for the first time, and she smiled with all her teeth like someone who had climbed onto the right side of a story. At lunch, Mr. Moran wandered in with a bag of screws he'd saved because they were the good kind and muttered that it was noisy in here, which we all agreed was a fine thing. I kept the condo. We corrected the deed formally, and the building lawyer wrote me a letter explaining every step in simple language, not because I needed it, but because I wanted a record of clarity. I also drafted a new will, clean, stubborn, boring as dry toast. It left Lakeview Makers a small endowment to fund scholarships for kids who don't think of themselves as special until a hand studies theirs over a circuit board. And I changed one more thing. Every new volunteer now signs a short, plain English code. We speak softly to those who have been made to feel small. We do not sign checks to ourselves. We do not call other people burdens. I taped a copy to the wall beside the laser cutter, where everyone waits their turn and cannot pretend not to read. In my quiet moments, I think about the night I pretended to lean on someone so the building would notice who was pushing. Reversed weakness buys time. Time buys review. Review buys truth. I didn't win by shouting. I won by holding my line and letting the facts do their relentless work. One evening, as the sun scraped gold off the lake, Daniel and I carried a crate of scrap wood to the curb. He stopped and looked at the sign I'd hung again after the gala. "Grandparents teach coding. You really won't ever rest, will you?" he asked, a sad brightness in his eyes. "Rest is overrated," I said. "But dignity? Dignity is a chair at the right height. You sit, you keep your back straight, and you don't give it away. If you're listening and you're worried you're becoming someone's liability, consider this. The people who love you won't ask for your signature before they bring you soup. The rest can meet you at the board table under fluorescent light with the ledger open, like we do on Thursday nights. I'll put on the kettle. You bring your receipts. I turn off the lights when we close, one switch by the door, then the banks over the workbenches. In that brief moment of darkness, before the exit sign's green hum takes over, I always ask myself one small question. Whose hands are steady because mine stayed steady today? It's not poetry. It's better. It's a life I get to keep living. And there's a chair waiting for you, just your height.